Right. So you wanted to really dig into Machiavellian principalities.
Yeah,
And we're going to unlock some serious Renaissance era wisdom here.
absolutely.
We've got excerpts from the Prince,
Good
obviously.
source.
But also we're looking at the Florentine history,
Right.
Machiavelli's military strategy from the art of war.
Mhm.
And some really interesting historical analysis, too, just to give it all some context.
What I think is so interesting is that, people sort of simplify Machiavelli down to the ends justify the means.
Right.
And that's really not it. There's so much more we can uncover here.
Yeah.
And I think our mission today is to really get into how he thought about acquiring, maintaining, and
Right.
then actually ruling these principalities.
Yes.
Like, how do you actually rule?
Yeah.
And it gets into power dynamics that are surprisingly relevant even, centuries later.
It does. So we're going beyond that, ruthless Machiavellian prince stereotype.
Right.
And getting into the nuts and bolts of his political philosophy.
I love that nuts and bolts.
Yeah. And speaking of nuts and bolts, let's start with, the foundation. Machiavelli breaks down principalities into different types.
Yeah, absolutely. He outlines 4 main ways somebody can become a prince.
Okay.
Hereditary, new, mixed, and civil.
Okay.
And hereditary principalities, kind of, as you might guess, are the ones that are passed down through family lines.
Right, like monarchies.
Exactly, traditional monarchies.
So, if you think of a royal family where the crown passes from parent to child, the Duke of Ferrara, whom Machiavelli mentions, would be a prime example of a hereditary prince.
Yeah.
Benefiting from that, established structure.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, is it easier to rule
Right.
if people are already used to your family being in charge?
Right.
It seems like it would be.
It almost seems like a built-in sort of legitimacy.
Totally. And he does point out that hereditary principalities tend to be more stable
Okay.
because the people have a history of obedience to that ruling family. So there's less potential for rebellion or upheaval
Yeah.
when the power structure is seen as legitimate and traditional.
That makes sense. Less chance of someone saying hey, wait a minute,
Right.
what are you doing here?
Exactly.
This has always been this way.
Totally.
But what about those who don't inherit power?
Right.
What about, you're starting from scratch?
That's when it gets really interesting because that's when Machiavelli considered new principalities the most challenging to govern.
I see.
Because you're not building on that legacy of authority.
Right.
You have to establish legitimacy. You have to gain the people's trust. You have to secure your position.
Right.
It's high stakes.
It is, yeah.
And Machiavelli gives us some really fascinating insight into how to play that game.
So, okay, let's say you're an ambitious individual in Renaissance Italy, and you've got your sights set on becoming a prince.
Right.
Where do you even begin?
Well, Machiavelli really stresses the importance of understanding the specific circumstances of your situation. He uses the example of Louis XII of France,
Okay.
who struggled to maintain control over Milan.
Interesting.
And then he contrasts him with the success of Alexander the Great,
Right.
who conquered vast territories and established this huge, lasting empire.
So is he saying that military might is the key?
It's definitely a factor, but Machiavelli's interested in more than just brute force.
Okay.
He digs into the methods used to solidify control over new territories.
I see.
He compares establishing colonies to using armies to control these new places.
Right.
And highlights the pluses and minuses of each approach.
Okay, let's unpack that. So colonies, I imagine, are about transplanting your own people
Yes.
and culture into that land.
Exactly.
And creating that base of support.
Yes.
So Machiavelli saw that as a long-term.
Absolutely. A
view.
long-term way of solidifying your control.
Right.
And he, thought these colonies, they could become self-sustaining
Okay.
and provide resources and manpower.
But of course, it takes time.
It takes a lot of time, a lot of resources. Yeah. And a certain level of trust in the people you're sending out to govern those colonies.
Right. Whereas maintaining a large army gives you that immediate control.
Yes.
But could be incredibly expensive.
For sure.
And probably breed resentment.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You got it. You're catching on quick.
Well,
Machiavelli recognized that armies, while they're essential for conquering,
Yeah.
they could also become a liability.
Right.
And if you're always relying on force to keep things in order,
Right.
you're not building a foundation for lasting stability.
Right.
Which brings us to one of, I think, Machiavelli's most surprising and brilliant insights,
Okay.
the importance of securing the support of the people.
Wait, hold on. Isn't that counterintuitive?
It seems like it would be.
Wouldn't a prince want to align himself with, Powerful nobles?
Right?
The wealthy elite?
You would think.
Those are the folks who traditionally hold sway.
Yeah,
Right?
that's what makes Machiavelli so fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
He challenges conventional wisdom. He saw the nobility as much more prone to betrayal and conspiracy.
Oh, interesting.
Especially against someone new.
Right.
You know, they have their own ambitions.
Yeah,
They're probably going to see a new ruler as a threat to their own power.
of course.
So Machiavelli is advocating for this more like populist approach.
So it's about winning over the hearts and minds
Yes.
of everyday people.
It's a radical idea.
That's not the ruthless tyrant I was expecting.
It was a radical idea for his time.
Yeah.
He truly believed that a prince's power rests on the consent of the governed.
Wow.
That if the people are on your side,
Yeah,
you have a much more stable foundation
I see.
for your rule.
I see.
And this leads to another crucial point.
No.
Satisfying the people should be a top priority,
Okay.
even if it requires actions that might not be considered, let's say, conventionally virtuous.
So Machiavelli is saying that sometimes a prince needs to be a bit strategic in his actions.
Perhaps
That maybe a little well-placed ruthlessness.
it's not about cruelty for its own sake. He's arguing for a calculated and pragmatic approach to leadership.
Okay.
He understood that sometimes a prince has to make tough choices to maintain order, stability, security.
Right.
Those are the ultimate goals.
Right.
And sometimes achieving them requires things that might be seen as harsh or even immoral.
By those who don't understand the big picture.
Exactly.
This is sounding very different from the Machiavelli equals evil.
Right,
The
right.
caricature.
Yeah.
This is so much more nuanced.
It is.
Yeah.
And you see this complexity when we look at his analysis of specific historical figures.
Okay.
So, for example, we have this really fascinating case of Agathocles the Sicilian,
Okay.
who rose from humble beginnings to become a powerful ruler.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What makes Agathocles such a good example of Machiavellian principles?
Well, his story really highlights this tension
Okay.
between ambition, ruthlessness,
Right.
and then that need to secure popular support.
Right.
So Agathocles was definitely ruthless in his rise to power, but he also understood to maintain that power.
Right.
He needed the people on his side.
Interesting.
He couldn't just rule through fear and intimidation.
So was he a sort of benevolent dictator?
Maybe a ruthless leader, but he used his power for good.
Right.
It's a question that scholars debate even today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. This
Yeah.
is really making me rethink everything I thought knew about Machiavelli.
Yeah,
It's clear that there's so much more to his philosophy
right.
than this simple pursuit of power.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're hitting on something really crucial here.
Yeah.
Machiavelli's challenging us to look beyond those surface-level judgments
Yeah.
and really grapple with the complexities of leadership.
Right.
It's about understanding this intricate dance between power strategy and the human condition.
And it feels like we're only just starting to scratch the surface here.
We are?
We've talked about types of principalities,
Yeah.
the challenges of getting and keeping power,
Mm-hmm.
the importance of popular support.
Yes.
But I have a feeling we're just getting warmed up.
Oh, yeah. There's so much more to explore
I think so, too.
in the world of Machiavellian principalities.
Right.
And we haven't even gotten to the specific qualities and strategies
Yeah.
that he believed a successful prince should cultivate.
Okay. Well, I'm hooked.
Great.
And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back to dig even deeper.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So we've been exploring Machiavelli's framework for thinking about principalities.
Right.
And we've seen that getting power is only half the battle.
It's true.
A smart prince has
Yeah.
to know how to hold on to that power.
Right.
Which means understanding both the art of war
Okay.
and, the finer points of governance.
Okay. So, that piques my curiosity.
Yeah.
What does Machiavelli have to say about, defending a principality?
Yeah.
Does he advocate for, building huge fortresses,
Yeah.
amassing gigantic armies?
Well, Machiavelli was a pragmatist,
Okay.
and he understood that there's no, one-size-fits-all. So
Right.
when it comes to fortresses, he says that their value really depends on the circumstances.
Okay.
He even gives examples of rulers who actually tore down their
Wow.
own fortresses
Real.
to solidify their rule.
Why would you dismantle your defenses?
Right.
It seems counterintuitive.
It does. But Machiavelli believed that a prince's best defense
Yeah.
is actually the support of the people.
Okay.
If your subjects are loyal and content,
Yeah,
they're less likely to rebel.
that's true.
And they'll even resist external threats.
Okay.
So a ruler who's only focused on, physical fortifications is kind of missing the bigger picture.
So a prince's strength is really in the hearts and minds
Mm-hmm.
of his people.
Yeah.
So what about those rulers who did rely on fortresses?
Right.
Were they all just doomed to fail?
Not necessarily. Machiavelli acknowledges that, they can be valuable tools
Okay.
in the right conditions.
Oh, wait.
And he uses this great example of the Countess of Forli,
Okay.
who successfully used strong fortifications and popular support to defend her territory against Cesare Borgia.
Cesare Borgia,
Yeah.
son of Pope Alexander VI,
That's right.
notorious for his ambition
Mm-hmm.
and, ruthlessness.
Exactly.
That must have been a tough challenge.
It was.
What can you tell us about the Countess and her strategies?
So the Countess of Forli
Yeah.
was really a shrewd and resourceful leader.
Okay.
She understood how important strong defenses were,
Right.
but she also recognized the power of popular support.
Right.
So she made sure her subjects were well taken care of, that they trusted her.
Yeah.
And this combination of, military preparedness and popular goodwill
Yeah.
made her a force to be reckoned with.
It sounds like a perfect illustration of what we were talking about.
Yes.
That multifaceted
Yep,
approach.
Totally.
So far, we've mostly talked about Machiavelli's general principles,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd love to see how these ideas play out
Yes.
in a real-world scenario. Does he offer any specific case studies?
He does.
Okay.
In fact, he dedicates quite a bit of his writing
Yeah.
to a figure who really embodies a lot of these key principles.
Okay.
Castruccio Castracani,
Okay.
who was a condottiere and mercenary captain
Okay.
who rose to become the Lord of Lucca in Tuscany.
Okay. A mercenary becoming a prince.
Right.
I got to hear this story.
It's a good one.
Yeah. What made Castruccio so remarkable?
Okay, so Castruccio was this master of political maneuvering
Okay.
and military strategy,
Okay.
a true embodiment of Machiavellian virtue.
Right.
He navigated the treacherous world of Renaissance Italy
Yeah.
with cunning and ambition,
Okay.
seizing every opportunity,
I see.
overcoming obstacles with remarkable skill.
So he was a man of action.
He was.
He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty?
He was decisive and resourceful.
Okay.
In fact, Machiavelli tells a story about how Castruccio used this really clever strategy
Okay.
to manipulate the events surrounding the death of a well-respected citizen to ultimately secure his own release from prison.
Wow.
So it was a bold move.
Yeah.
Maybe not the most moral one,
Right.
but it showed his understanding of power dynamics
Okay.
and his willingness to take risks.
That's a great example of how a Machiavellian prince might operate.
Yeah.
Using strategy
Mm-hmm.
and opportunism to get what he wants.
Absolutely.
But what about his military skills?
Right.
You mentioned he was a condottiere.
Yes,
So I imagine he saw his fair share of warfare.
he did. And Machiavelli highlights his brilliance as a military commander.
Okay.
He recounts this amazing battle,
Okay.
the Battle of the Arno River,
Okay.
where Castruccio,
Yeah.
despite being outnumbered,
Really?
outmaneuvered the Florentine army
Wow.
and achieved a decisive victory.
He had a knack for turning things to his advantage.
He did. And that's one of the key takeaways from Castruccio's story.
What's that?
This ability to adapt, to think strategically,
Right.
and act decisively, even when things are tough. Qualities that Machiavelli thought were essential for any ruler who wanted to achieve greatness.
And Machiavelli really uses his life like a blueprint
He does.
for effective leadership.
He even suggests that Castruccio surpassed a lot of his contemporaries
Interesting.
in terms of skill and acumen.
Wow, that's high praise.
It is. And it shows how much Machiavelli valued people who could get things done,
Yeah.
people who could shape the world,
Right.
even if it meant using unorthodox methods
Right.
or bending conventional morality.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on how power works. Not just in Renaissance Italy, but in our world too.
You're getting at something really important here.
Yeah.
While Machiavelli was writing about princes and principality,
Right.
his insights into human nature and the way power works,
Yeah.
they really transcend time and context.
It's like he's giving us tools,
Exactly.
a framework for understanding how complex leadership is, ambition,
Yeah.
and the pursuit of goals.
That's right. He's not telling us how to be a tyrant.
Right.
He's encouraging us to think critically about power
Yes.
and the choices that leaders have to make.
Really, in any sphere of influence.
Exactly.
This is making me rethink everything I thought I knew.
That's the power of engaging with Machiavelli.
Yeah.
He challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths
It's true.
about ourselves and the world around us.
It's been a really enlightening conversation so far.
Good.
But I feel like there's still so much more to discuss.
Oh, definitely.
We've talked about getting power,
Yes.
keeping power, defending power.
Right.
But what about the personal qualities of a successful prince?
Yes.
How should a Machiavellian ruler conduct himself?
That's a good question.
Not just on the battlefield
Right.
or in the council chamber, but in life.
Now you're getting to the heart of the matter.
Yep.
Machiavelli doesn't shy away from the trickier,
Okay.
and maybe even controversial, aspects of how a prince should behave.
All right, let's get into it. Welcome back. We've been on this journey through Machiavelli's ideas about principalities,
Yeah.
the challenge of getting power,
Right.
keeping it, the strategy involved in defending it.
Absolutely.
But I'm really fascinated by this question of, like, personal conduct.
Yeah.
How does a Machiavellian prince, how do they actually move through the world? Not just strategically,
Right.
but in terms of their character and behavior.
That's when things get really interesting because Machiavelli goes into the moral complexities of leadership.
Right.
And he recognizes that a prince is often in situations where, like, conventional morality just doesn't work.
Okay, so we've talked about this idea of, like, strategic ruthlessness.
Right.
That sometimes a prince has to make tough choices.
Yeah.
Maybe even harsh decisions for the good of the state.
Yeah, for the greater good.
But does Machiavelli give us any guidance on balancing pragmatism with ethical concerns?
He does, and his advice might surprise you. Okay.
Machiavelli says that a prince should always try to appear virtuous,
Okay.
even if his actions don't always line up with those virtues.
Interesting.
It's about creating a public image
Okay.
that inspires confidence and loyalty.
So is there an element of performance involved?
Absolutely.
It's not enough to just have those qualities. You have to project them.
You get to project them. Machiavelli thought a prince should be seen as merciful,
Okay.
faithful, humane, upright, even religious.
Wow.
But he also says that ruling often means
Right.
a prince has to act in ways that contradict these virtues.
That makes me think of that saying, it's lonely at the top.
It is.
A prince has to make those hard calls,
Yeah.
knowing people might not get it.
Right.
They might judge him,
Yeah.
even if he's doing what's best for everybody.
Exactly. That's the weight of leadership as Machiavelli sees it.
It is, yeah.
And he doesn't try to make it sound easy.
Right.
In fact, he famously says,
A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good.
that's a pretty stark view of human nature.
It is, but it's kind of true,
It is. Yeah.
especially when you think about politics.
Right.
Then and now.
Yeah. It's cutthroat.
It is. Machiavelli was a realist.
Okay.
He wasn't into, utopian ideals or anything.
Right.
He wanted to know how power works
In the real world.
in the real world, where ambition,
Right.
self-interest,
Yeah.
deceit
Yeah.
drives so much of human behavior.
So a prince has to be willing to play the game,
Mm-hmm.
even if it means bending the rules.
It's about adapting to
Mhm.
whatever the situation calls for.
Yeah, even if it means making some uncomfortable choices.
Right. Yeah.
So is there a line
Mhm.
that even a Machiavellian prince shouldn't cross?
Right. Is it really all about the ends justifying the means?
Right.
Machiavelli doesn't give us easy answers.
Right.
He shows us this really complex and kind of unsettling view of power. It's true.
That forces us to think about these ethical dilemmas
Right.
that come with being a leader.
Yeah.
He argues that a prince can't always follow strict moral rules.
Right.
Because that could put the safety of the state
Yeah.
and the well-being of the people at risk.
That's a heavy burden
It is.
to carry the fate of others like that.
It really is.
It makes you wonder, what does it do to you as a person?
Right.
To have to make these tough calls all the time.
But Machiavelli also recognizes
Yeah.
how alluring power is,
Yeah.
the appeal of shaping the world to your will.
Yeah.
He seems to say that anyone who wants to rule
Right.
has to be willing to face this complexity,
Okay.
to deal with the moral gray areas,
Right.
and accept that not everyone's going to understand or agree with their choices.
That brings us back to the image.
Yeah.
If a prince can't always act virtuously,
Right.
then looking virtuous becomes even more important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Machiavelli got it.
Right.
He understood the power of perception.
A prince's reputation is a weapon,
It's a tool.
a tool to inspire loyalty,
Right.
to scare off enemies,
Yeah.
and to shape what people think.
So it's not enough to just be powerful.
Right.
You have to look the part.
You have to project that image.
Yeah, strength, wisdom, like political theater.
It is. And Machiavelli gives us specific advice on how to do it.
Okay.
He says it's super important to avoid doing things that would make people hate you or despise you.
Of course.
So even though a prince might need to be ruthless sometimes, he's got to be strategic about it.
Okay.
Always thinking about how it's going to look to the people.
So finding that balance.
Right.
Between being feared and loved, respected and understood.
Exactly. It's tricky.
It is. Well, this has been a really thought-provoking look.
I agree.
At Machiavelli's concept of the principality.
It's been great.
We've covered different types.
Yeah.
The challenges of getting power.
Right.
Holding on to it.
Yeah.
The importance of having the people on your side.
Absolutely.
And then these really complex codes of conduct.
And I think what we've seen is that even though his ideas are, from Renaissance Italy, they still resonate today.
They do.
His work gives us this timeless way of thinking about how power works.
Right.
The art of leadership and that constant tension between ambition, morality, and trying to do good.
It makes you question everything.
It does.
And it makes you think critically about power.
Yeah.
And maybe even look for ways these Machiavellian principles are playing out in our own lives.
And that's what we wanted to do. To equip you with the knowledge and insights you need to navigate this crazy world.
It is a crazy world. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
On this journey into the Machiavellian mind.
Absolutely.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive.
Can't wait.
Into some other fascinating topic.
Sounds great.
But until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.